All right, Genesis 34, let's call this one It Felt Secure. Why? Because that is a literal quote from the passage, and it's really set up by the move that Jacob makes to his new land after making peace with Esau, a time when his daughter reasonably should have felt secure in going out to see the new neighborhood, for lack of a better term. And they actually gets her into a lot of trouble. And it reminds me of days like today, where even though it may seem new, that it's just really unsafe to trust in human decency anymore. Stories like this remind us of how old the principle of knowing your environment really goes back to. And so this is a situation where she's going out to look at the new town, completely unaware that there is a prince in that new town who has a lot of clout. He feels like he has the right to do whatever he wants. And that's exactly what he does with Dinah. And so if you're familiar with the story, you know it ends up with him taking her. Keep it simple, let you fill in the rest of your imagination, because he felt secure in his position of power, doing whatever he wanted. But he did not count on the retaliation from her brothers. And so after taking Dinah, he actually seems to feel as though he's in love with her. And so he wants to marry her. And so he tries to make terms of peace with Jacob's sons. But Jacob's sons aren't really feeling it. But much like Jacob, they have a way with deception. And so they negotiate terms of peace. And while they're negotiating terms of peace, they are actually setting up their revenge, because they tell this young man Shechem, who's taken their sister, that if all the men of the town get circumcised, they'll be okay. She can be his wife, and they'll trade back and forth. What actually happens is, on the third day of their circumcision, when they're in their pain, that's when Jacob's sons decide to attack. It's not all of them, it's two of them, her brothers directly. And they attack at a time when the Bible literally says the town felt secure. And so that is where the title comes from. But it really goes back even further than that, because ultimately what happens is Jacob's sons, in taking after daddy and using deception to get their vengeance, actually attract more danger to themselves than they are able to shoo away by killing all the men of the town. And so Jacob is going to have to move again in the very next chapter, after only being settled there for a short period of time. But in a lot of ways, this goes back to the way in which Jacob felt secure before he had turned over a new leaf, showing signs of being a man of integrity, the way in which he felt secure in dealing with the truth loosely. In a lot of ways, it seems to be an example that was played out in front of his kids. And this is one of our first indications that we see in the Bible of generational sin. We mentioned it back a few chapters ago, because we said that Adam and Eve's tendency to push past boundaries was something that Cain picked up on. But the second generation rarely keeps it in the same context as the last. And so it usually goes awry, because you might have heard it like this from other preachers, because it's a famous saying: we don't control sin, sin controls us. And whether you believe in God or not, it's the same thing with bad habits. It's not long before a bad habit that seems like it's fun to something we do recreationally. Sometimes it can just be a recreational habit. But if you've ever lost control of a recreational habit, you understand that oftentimes you're playing with fire with a habit or a vice that seems innocent on the front end. So ultimately what happens is, the example that Jacob has set goes really back to what Abraham did when using deception to get out of a tight spot. And the next generation is played out in Isaac, who does the same thing. But by the time we get to Jacob, Jacob is using deception to gain an advantage materially over his brother. And now by the time you get to this generation, his kids are using deception as a tool of murder. And so this is an exaggerated instance where we can see again that smaller example in Cain and Abel, where generational sin is a problem. Once again, going back to that caution that we see in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, it says today is the day to try to turn back from whatever it is that we have set in motion on the wrong course. Why? Because re-steering our lives back in the right direction can take more effort than we realize.